Good evening. Thanks for joining us. A Brown County judge stops court twice today during the sentencing of convicted killer Joshua Scolman.
Emotions running high with the families of the victims, even the judge noting Scolman's lack of remorse for his deadly attack. Last week, a jury found Scolman guilty of the 2022 killing of a fellow Green Bay correctional inmate, Timothy Neighbors Jr., and attempting to kill inmate Lamont Washington, both of whom are black. Almost a dozen armed officers stood between the judge and the gallery as he handed down a life sentence without the possibility of parole. This coming after the judge had to leave the bench twice because of outbursts in the courtroom. At one point, the murder victim's father claimed Scolman was laughing while he delivered the victim's statement. The judge then stopped the sentencing for a second time when Scolman made racist statements when addressing the court, which angered the victim's family. We're choosing not to air those statements, but Scolman also explained why he feels no remorse for the deadly attack. Last week, a jury rejected Scolman's defense team's insanity plea, which the judge weighed in on today.
I agree with this jury. I don't think that's a mental illness. That's a thoughtful conviction. And when one arrives at that conviction, do I need to recite historically the horrible crimes that have been done in the name of I am a weapon and I am a purifier? It just causes one to pause and almost lose their breath.
Scolman's already serving dozens of years in prison for a deadly OWI case from 2006. After that sentence is over, today's life term in prison will begin and he will not be granted parole. Restitution is yet to be decided.